Hey all, here we are again for another fun-filled video for cultural anthropology. Fingers crossed that this video is going to work and upload the way that it's supposed to. Spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to get everything straightened out last week, and now that I've updated everything on my computer, my printer doesn't work. Sometimes the world is just out to get you. Well, that's really annoying. Okay. So I'm super excited because this week we are talking about gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, fascinating topics, something that's a big part of our cultural milieu and the research that I actually do in the world. So this week is fun. And let's see. So we're going to talk this week about how men and women are different. We're going to talk about how men and women are unequal in culture around the world. We're going to talk about human beings that fit outside the boxes of male and female. We're going to talk about how sex and sexuality and gender are all totally different things that have some impact on one another but are different things. We're going to talk about human sexuality. So I just want to start with saying that gender, the idea of social roles, rules and behaviors and things that we understand are closely attached to whether you're a masculine person or a feminine person. Those things are culturally situated. We think of them as being biological in much the same way that we think of race as being biological. It's a naturalized system. This means it's so incorporated into every part of our lives that we think of it as biology. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about this question this week of what's biology and what's cultural, because our sex and gender system, how all this stuff hooks up together, is biocultural. It has aspects of both and they mesh into one another. So let's start here in the biology of this piece, okay? So, of course, human beings are sexually dimorphic. That means that men and women are different, right? We're different in a bunch of different ways, not just in sort of the plumbing, right? Like who has a penis and who has a vagina, right? But also the question of other things about our bodies as well, right? General tendencies where we see men overall being bigger than women. We see that women carry fat deposits on their body in different places than men. We think of men as being somewhat stronger than women overall, which is not to say that there are not some women who are stronger than some men. That is certainly true. That's really going to drive me nuts through the whole video. Let's see if we can make it go away. Okay. So we are sexually dimorphic, not as sexually dimorphic as some primates, but we are certainly sexually dimorphic. And it's not just a question of human beings only come in male and female. Something like 1.7%, I think, of the US population is born what we call intersexed. That means that all the different pieces that make up whether we're male or female don't necessarily link up together the way we expect them to. So something isn't clearly binary there. It could be hormone balance, it could be genitals, it could be chromosomal, right? So 1.7% of the population are born intersex. That means that things do not clearly align the way that doctors expect them to. And in the US, because we are deeply invested in people being clearly either male or female, they tend to surgically correct that, which can be a problem because those folks then who grow up being assigned a sex, assigned a biological sex that is not necessarily accurate and might not be how they want to live their lives. The thing is that both men and women, folks anywhere on this continuum, we both have both estrogen and testosterone, even though we think of those two things as being sort of the big sex hormones, right? So women have estrogen and that makes us, I don't know, flaky, but also nurturing and has all these connections to things we think about women, and then testosterone is manly and only dudes have it, and it means that they are more aggressive and they get in fights easily and they don't know how to cry, and like all these, cultural things that we associate with biology, but that's not entirely true. Both women and men, all human beings, have a balance of estrogen and testosterone in their bodies. I am clearly anatomically female. I still have testosterone. So do you. Okay, so these ideas we have attached to male and female do not always pan out the way that we expect them to. And we can see this in the inequality between men and women that we see pretty much in every culture around the world. Now, there's been some debate over whether the gendered division of labor, which puts women automatically on the bottom, is a cultural universal. We think that that's likely true, but a good portion of early anthropological research was really a question of men studying men, right? And so we didn't really get the big picture of what it looked like, the relationship between the sexes, the relationship between different gender roles. But what we found through our cross-cultural research is that both masculinity and femininity, the gender roles that we think of as being clearly lined up to male and female, are not biological, they're created. Excuse me, just 1 minute. Leroy, that's enough. Taking care of a friend's dog for the weekend. Okay. Both of them are created because gender is a set of roles that all cultures have. Roles that say people who are masculine, who are male, should act in masculine ways. And this is what's masculine for this culture. Things like trucks and football and beer and chasing women. But that varies quite a bit between cultures. There are cultures in which everybody assumes that the way women are is that they are more aggressive than men, and the way men are is that men are gentler than women. A lot of Margaret Mead's early research got into this very question. She looked at these 3 islands very near one another, and on one of them, men were quite a bit like we expected masculine gender roles to be, and on the next island over, women were quite a bit like we would expect masculine gender roles to be, and on the 3rd island, the gender roles were much more balanced. This is because gender is created. The idea that women should have long hair and like bright colors and not like sports and like all of that stuff. Those are gender rules that are associated with women, but they are not natural necessarily to us. That's not to say that many women don't like those things, right? But men can like those things too, because they are about gender. They are not really about our biology. And when you look at some cultures around the world, you see that there are more than 2 options for gender, more than 2 options for a social role that you can portray through your behavior and through your dress and through the things that you like and prefer to do. In these communities that have more than 2 options for gender, more than masculine and feminine, it's important to note that this does not mean that all of these people are gay. Right? Because sexual orientation is yet a 3rd piece of this puzzle. We have sex, which is biology, what you're born with, the connections between your anatomy, your hormones, your chromosomes. We have gender, the social roles that are sort of layered on top of that. Women are supposed to do X and Y and like X and Y. And then we have sexual orientation, which is who you are romantically or sexually attracted to. So you can be a 3rd gendered person in a bunch of different cultures around the world and not necessarily be attracted to people of the same sex or the same gender as you are. That is true in the United States as well. I'm going to talk just for a minute about 3 of those options. One, we can look at Navajo culture. Lots of Native American tribes refer to folks who walk outside of masculine and feminine as being two-spirited because they partake from both. In Navajo, those folks have a specific name. It's Nadali. And they are seen in that culture as spiritual healers and mediators. This is often a role taken on by 3rd gendered folks in different cultures around the world because they are seen by their community as being sort of between the roles played by men and women. So they are good mediators between the 2 roles. In India, we see a 3rd gendered group called the Hijira. Hijira are sometimes intersexed, as we were talking earlier. Sometimes they have been physically castrated. They are people who were born and thought to be male who lived their lives closer to the role seen as that for women in India. And the Hijira also play this particular spiritual role. They're known for giving blessings. They are spiritual healers, and they provide blessings when a child is born or at a wedding. That's their traditional role. But of course, when colonialism showed up, as it pretty much has just about everywhere around the world, there was a big push against these third gendered folks, and they were run out of their traditional roles. And lots of Hijira now make their living through prostitution because they don't have a lot of other options, although there's a strong political movement right now to bring rights and responsibilities back to the Hijira community. Okay, and then here in the US, we have our own transgender folks. This is a big umbrella term that covers many different people who fall outside of these clear binary gender roles that we think of as being masculine and feminine. This could be drag queens, the folks we used to describe as transvestites, people who describe themselves as being born one sex and wanting to change to the other, even though many folks don't associate with that particular description. And not everybody who an anthropologist would think of as transgender would necessarily describe themselves in that way. And with all of that, those folks are not necessarily what we think of as gay or queer in the United States, right? Because that piece is, again, about sexual orientation rather than your gender role and social role that you portray in community. So if you look at me, for instance, right, my biological sex is female, right? My gender role is pretty traditionally feminine, right? Like I have long hair. You probably can't tell, but I have really long hair, and I wear close to traditionally feminine clothes, and my sexual orientation is lesbian, right? So those things don't necessarily line up together. You might have thought from that third category that I would also like things like pickup trucks and baseball caps and football, but none of those things are true. Cats, neither. Don't like cats. Okay, so the thing is that sexual orientation also is way more flexible and more varied around the world than we see it here at home. It ranges all the way from folks who think of themselves as asexual, who are not sexually or romantically attracted to anybody, to polyamorous, who are sexually and romantically attracted to a whole broad span of folks and perhaps act on that. The thing is that all three of these subjects kind of tie up biology, psychology, and culture. In the US, we tend to see things as being very fixed, and that is not necessarily so. In fact, there's lots of cultures in which if two men have sex with each other, only one of them is seen as what we would describe as homosexual, and that would be let me think of a good way to describe this, the not active partner in the activity, okay? The thing is that all cultures have rules about sex, who it's okay to have it with, how we organize it, and what it means about us. That's not just the US. So like any of our other cultural factors about our lives, like race, all these complicated things, right? The real picture is much more complex and varied and dynamic than we would think otherwise. Oh my God, we're at 13 minutes. I could talk about this all day. Perhaps you don't want to listen to me talk about it all day, but fingers crossed that this loads up tonight so I can get it on the stupid Blackboard site in a reasonable amount of time. Good talking to you all. See you in the forums this